Welcome to Coppers and Brass, a new series of programmes on Irish traditional music. During the series we're going to look at a number of topics that affect Irish traditional music which normally haven't been aired or debated enough in public. One of those themes is the extraordinary contribution that Irish travellers have made to Irish traditional music, and I'm delighted to have in the studio with me Michael McDonagh from the Meath Travellers Centre, and Michael is going to join us later in a discussion on how he sees Travellers'Culture culture today and how it helped make a contribution to Irish traditional music. We'll also later on in the programme be visiting a session in the Cobblestones Bar in Dublin, where we'll be hearing some of the best exponents of Irish traditional music perform. But before we do all that, I recently went to the Meath Travellers Centre in Dublin, where I met with one of the directors, Martin Collins, and Martin helped us explore some of those issues in some detail.
Well, we have a number of different programs in here in the organisation. We have a primary healthcare program that employs 14 traveller women. We also have a youth work program. We have a CE scheme. We have a domestic violence program, because obviously, domestic violence is an issue in our community as it is within every other community, and we have to, rise up to the challenges in addressing, very sensitive issues within our community, and domestic violence happens to be one of them. Feuding is another. Also looking at, travellers, gay travellers in the community, and how we can be more inclusive of our own community. So the real challenges there, very sensitive, delicate issues that we have to bite the bullet on. I have to say. Then we have a community development program, which I'm part of myself directly, and we lobby government, we work with government, and we try and develop policies that would create better outcomes for travellers in terms of education, accommodation, and so forth. I'm going to be very honest with you. Until I read your own book, Free Spirits, I actually wasn't aware myself of the level and the immense contribution that my people made to Irish traditional music. And as I read the book, as I went through, every page, I got more and more and more proud of what my people have done for Irish traditional music. There has been various attempts to get rid of travellers through assimilation, through rehabilitation. Okay, different policies and programs were put in place to basically get rid of travellers. Call it ethnic cleansing if you want, call it genocide without the spilling of blood. But the end result was the same. It was about getting rid of a community of people who have a very distinctive culture. This government and successive governments, and indeed society overall, you can see where they have defined nomadism as being vagrant, as being deviant, right? And doesn't fit in with a Western civilized democratic society. And that's just another example of the racism that my community have to experience. So there have been recent events which that we are very concerned about, because they're quite dangerous. Like, we've had one judge there recently, only 2 months ago, described travellers as knackers, and another judge described us as being Neanderthal men living by the laws of the jungle. Now, these were 2 district court judges, and I think it's extremely dangerous, and we are very concerned, that you have people in the higher echelons of Irish society, people with privilege and people with power, coming out making these very racist and very dangerous and very irresponsible statements. When you have politicians and judges coming out with racist comments, what that does, it effectively legitimizes other people to be racist, and especially if they get away with it. Like the politicians and judges, they can behave with impunity, and that's a very dangerous signal to be giving out to the rest of society. And what we want is leadership. We want political leadership, and we want leadership from judges. For example, how can a traveller have any confidence in the judicial system when we have judges coming out with these comments? Now, I'm not suggesting for one moment that those 2 particular judges, that they reflect the views of all judges. I don't believe that for 1 second. But nonetheless, to have 2 judges to make those comments is absolutely outrageous. And there are travellers out there who would not have any confidence in the court system. You see all sorts of problems beginning to manifest themselves, like mental illness, feuding, drug addiction, alcoholism, marital breakup, you know, these problems begin to emerge. And all of the research by anthropologists and sociologists demonstrate this quite clearly. You know, these are the manifestations of where a people are oppressed and their culture is rejected and so forth. So I would suggest that if there was an unequivocal recognition by the Irish state of traveller ethnicity, I think symbolically that would be a huge lift for us as a community. We have taken a hammering here, Tommy, over the last 1500 years. The message that we have received from society over the years, whether that's through the media, whether it's through politics or whatever, the message that we have received is that we are a worthless people, that we are misfits, that we are dysfunctional, and we need to be civilised and normalised. So a lot of travellers have internalised that, and they've lost some self-respect, and they lack pride in their culture. So we are calling on the Irish government to do the right thing and to not just symbolically say it, but to have it reflected in legislation, to have it reflected in our constitution. If you look at our constitution, I mean, if you read that, you'd think we were just a white, settled Catholic society. It doesn't reflect, you know, the multi-ethnic nature of our country. Now, if you look at other constitutions, for example, in Finland, there's a very explicit recognition in the Finnish constitution of Roma people and the Sami people. I want my people to be reflected in the constitution, our experience, our reality, our existence. And we're completely non-existent as far as the constitution is concerned. We have survived those 1500 years of attempted assimilation, and we've come through it. And I also think, in addition to that, we are now much more organised as a community. We have lots of different travel organisations, you know, who are very political and who are representing travellers. And I think those two issues combined, our character, strength and substance, and the fact that travellers are much more politically involved now in representing their people, I think when you combine those two together, that gives me cause for optimism. And I think things, you know, can only get better for us as we move forward.
We're not your enemy. I could be you. You could be me. There's strength in diversity, so keep it strong. Move along. Move along. You don't belong. Move along.
Well, that was Martin Collins of Pavy Point helping us reflect on some of the big issues that are affecting travellers today. Michael, before we get into the substance of it, who are you and what do you represent?
Oh my God, Tommy, who am I? Well, as I was talking, Michael McDonagh my name is, and I'm manager for a voluntary organisation that operates in Meath, called Meath Travellers Workshops. For many years we were known as Navan Travellers Workshops, but now we've expanded, covering the full county. So, and that organisation is a community development organisation, which, believe it or not, has been one of the longest organisations in existence. It was set up in 1965, and we're still going today, so we must be doing something right.
And what are the key...
Our key areas of work wouldn't be totally different than Pavy Point in a lot of ways. Like we do a lot around childcare, a lot around the community development, enterprise, but one of our big areas is heritage. And we do a lot around the heritage aspect of our work, and we have a living history project, and we do a substantial amount of work around that.
Well, that leads me very nicely to my next question is, who are Irish travellers? Where did you come from and when?
Oh my God, Tommy, have you got a couple of days to sit down there, Tommy, have you?
The clock's ticking.
God, clock on that one. It's a very difficult question to answer, I'd say, because a lot of people have perceptions of who travellers are. And when we talk about who are Irish travellers, it's a brilliant question, because brilliant insofar as that people are so sure, but sadly they were so wrong, because people had this assumption that travellers came around the time of famine and the 1840s, and in some way existed prior to that as country people, the same as everybody else, and became travellers at that time, which is not true. Travellers had existed in Ireland back as far as history goes, because there's mention of travellers in history so much, it's unbelievable, and we've missed so much of it. And there's evidence of travellers and legislation in the 1600s, the 50s, and 1175 was the first written evidence of travellers. So travellers have existed, and there was a very interesting documentary done quite recently around the DNA and called The Blood of Travellers, which I took part in, and they used my blood in it and our DNA, and it showed my mum's DNA being a very, very old DNA and very closed. It didn't mix, and we didn't get a huge amount of matches for it. Actually, it was something like 1 in 500 or something like that, which is quite rare.
So far back did it
that went
trace
back.
your ancestry?
My ancestor and my mum's side in the west of Ireland would have back something like 3,000 years. Now, that is serious, yeah. My dad's DNA would have been very common DNA and would have been shared by a huge amount of men in the west of Ireland. But having said that, travellers, today people get the impression that travellers only came about a short time ago in the 1840s. That's incorrect. And it's quite dangerous insofar as that who we think someone is and our perceptions of somebody makes us think in a certain way about them. And very much so with travellers, because people think that we came through a default system, that we were some way damaged through a famine and damaged country people. Now let us rehabilitate them and re-assimilate them back into mainstream society. And that's a dangerous thing, rather than, which this programme is doing, which I'm really pleased with, is looking at the celebration of culture and celebration of identity, rather than trying to make someone into something that they're not. And I think that's why that question is so important. Who are Irish travellers? And it's a question I don't feel is asked often enough. Now, as I said earlier on, Tommy, to go into detail on that now, you may be prepared to sit for a couple of days on it.
Not at all. That's very interesting. The fact that your lineage can be traced back 3,000 years is absolutely incredible. Irish society has gone through major changes since about the 1950s with technologies and that, and Irish travellers are a wee bit a part of Irish society. And I'm wondering how young travellers are affected by change in society and technology, and has it weakened their self-identity as travellers, or has it strengthened it?
I think there's argument both ways, in a sense. I think that when you look at traveller identity today, and it is an important issue, and it's so important that we actually spend a huge amount of our time in our organisation and looking at the heritage and the reinforcing of the positive image of one's own identity. And I think for travellers today, it's gone more and more important, because if you look at Irish history, let's forget about traveller history for a moment, let's look at Irish history. And you look at Irish history, what happened to the Irish identity, and how a lot of Irish people left this country ashamed of who they were, ashamed of their identity. And that sort of reinforces a whole negative image. And Irish travellers were no different. Irish travellers were oppressed, put down, and made ashamed of who they are. And we carried that. There's no saying we didn't. And we hid the fact that we're travellers. Started not to use our own language until it actually almost died away completely. It affected our music, it affected all aspects of our culture. And today, travellers, more and more travellers are now becoming more and more proud of their own identity. And that's not happening by chance. That's been made happen in a lot of very different ways. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. If you look at some, and this again links very much into this programme, when you look at some of the music and the musicians and the singers that are out there, and so you hear the likes of the Furies, you hear the likes of the Dorbans, you hear Paddy Keenan. Now they're all
Mickey Dunne,
all them fantastic skilled musicians, and how proud they are of who they are. Now that has a huge ripple effect, and that affects a lot of other people as well. And then go to more modern times. Then you go to the young Ward lad that won that Voice, or that way back, that I can't think of it, I shouldn't be saying it.
The TV show.
The TV show, and then the young girl, quite recent, this young Cork girl, McDonagh, young Kelly girl, or McDonagh girl, and she actually done The Voice. And it shows the skill that's out there, particularly in music and particularly in song.
And the young Doyles over in England.
Unbelievable.
Very, very well.
And then there was the young Keenan group down in Ennis. Like, if we want to start to give them, we could be here all day rhyming them up. And
I'm here all day.
Isn't it absolutely brilliant that we have the opportunity to do that?
It is.
What I'm saying, it is. So all of that's there. So you have a huge amount of people saying, rather than thinking, oh, how negative it is and how ashamed I should be of who I am. Now people are very proud, and it's been expressed through music. It's been expressed through a lot of firsts. And what I mean by a lot of firsts, you have travellers, in a sense, oh, you're forced to do this. Yes, but travellers never got an opportunity to do things before, so you will have a lot of travellers doing things, like you have Olympic boxers, you have the sport, you have all of that, and that's what's given travellers more of a pride in their identity, and I think that's what's happening. Now also, the other thing that's coming up, which I find really interesting, is Ireland has Irish travellers naturally living in it. But we're not confined to Ireland. Like if you go to England, there's a huge population of Irish travellers in England, Scotland, Wales, France, Germany, Australia, and over to America where a lot of Irish went, a lot of Irish travellers went as well.
You've been over there
Oh, I've been
recently,
over a
visited.
number of times with them.
Tell me about the briefly
Very
about the
interesting group.
Murphys.
Yeah, in
Murphy.
Murphy Village, you have a huge extended family systems over there. You have, and getting more and more strong links with travellers here. And one of the interesting things of how they're actually meeting, there's two ways they've met. I find both of them very interesting. First one was during the Second World War. You had Irish travellers who served in the British Army during the Second World War, and you had Irish travellers who were served in the American Army during the First, and they met in France. And how they knew one another was actually through the language. And that was a really fascinating link. The other is through, believe it or not, Facebook.
I want to come back to that in a second because I want to pick up on how young travellers are actually engaged in social network.
That's right.
But before we do that, we're going to take our weekly trip down to the Cobblestones Bar in Dublin and enjoy some really first-class Irish traditional music. Our performers this week will be Sean Gilrain and Davy Sheridan, two of the finest exponents of the Leitrim flute playing style.
We're going to play a couple of hornpipes. The first one I think is called The Stack of Wheat, and the second one it was recorded by two of the greatest musicians that ever came out of County Leitrim, Oliver Loughlin and Damien O'Brien. They recorded it back in the late 90s. I think the name of it could be Mrs. Galvin's or Miss Galvin's or something like that. But the first one is definitely The Stack of Wheat, so two hornpipes.
Well, piping hot music there from the Cobblestones Bar in Dublin with Sean and Davy. some of the best flute playing you're likely to hear for a long, long time. Meanwhile, Michael, we were talking about social network before we took that break.
Indeed, yeah.
Are young Irish travellers as engaged in social networking as most other young people are?
I think very much so. Not only are they engaged in social networking, like, you know, for a lot of them, they're keeping communication with one another through Facebook. And it has a very positive impact, but it can have a bit of a negative impact too. You'd be very careful with that. But having said that, I would focus more on the positive at the moment, where you have a huge amount of young travellers linking with one another, but not only linking with one another as in through our extended family, but going out and beyond that. So you have travellers linking from Australia, from America, from New Zealand, you name it, you have Irish travellers linking. And the one interesting factor, the whole lot of it, and which is really, I find, mind-boggling in a sense, is that they're communicating the language that was spoken in Ireland in the pre-1200s. And that is really mind-boggling. Cant is a language that was spoken by travellers and spoken in Ireland as far back as we have evidence of in the pre-1200s. So you have these,
And they're actually using that
and they're using that on Facebook.
That's amazing.
Now the spelling mightn't be the best at times,
Sure,
but
my
having said
spelling
that,
isn't the best either, I wouldn't worry about that.
But then how do
That's
you spell
amazing,
some of these words that are more Shangail?
They were oral, they weren't
Oh yeah,
writing
they
down
never
anyway.
learned how to write this down. But now they're starting to write it, and I find it very interesting to sit down
So
and
that's
try and read it.
reinforcing a part of
And
the
that's-
culture. New technology is
that new-
reinforcing the old
It actually is
ways,
giving
yeah.
an opportunity for young travellers to actually communicate in their own language. And I find this really amazing, you know. That's one part of it, I suppose. But also, there's also sort of the whole marriage patterns being changed around with bit. And the social,
Oh, the curtain over the internet.
That's right, I have to be very careful with that, you know. Anyway.
No harm done there.
No problem.
That suggests to me then that if they're doing that and they're doing it in their own language, that there is a pride in their culture and their identity.
Very much so.
Is that the way you find young
I
travellers
find it
today?
extremely positive that travellers are being more and more, and even have Facebook pages about travellers and talking to one another, and you have different families talking to one another, which is brilliant, which I find very exciting. I also find it very good is that young travellers are now sort of saying, we are part of this community, this is our community. Where in the past they were hiding the fact that they were and denying that they're actually travellers, and that's the more positive.
That's
bit,
good.
yeah.
That's the right thing. We're going to wrap up shortly, but I want to thank you for coming along. It's been really interesting. As you said earlier, if we had a couple of hours, we could have put into,
we could indeed.
particularly the blood of the travellers, and that whole issue
yeah.
about identity and where travellers came from and when they did. But I want to come back to the couplers and brass theme of Irish traditional music. Why do you think that some traveller families made such a great job of interpreting Irish traditional music? What was it about travellers' way of life that lent itself so well to playing traditional music?
Oh my God. I think that if you went back to, and I actually remember this time, so it's not that far back. As a child, you would remember the way travellers would have travelled, and they were very, very nomadic people. But when you got up in the morning early, you'd done your day's work, you went through whatever had to be done. But then you sat down in the evening, and the evening was yours, and how do you pass away the long evening? So you had the fire, you had the campsite, and travellers would all gather around the fire, and they would entertain one another. Now they'd entertain one another through stories, but they'd also very much entertain one another through song and music. And I think that was what kept and maintained a huge amount of the traditional music among travellers. Now that was for a lot of families, but some certain families actually shone through on that. And what would have happened to some families is that you were a tinsmith, you were a horse dealer, but they were also musicians, and they would go to the fairs and go to the markets, and you had the street singers, you had the buskers, you had all of them, and some of them to this day you'll hear like the likes of the Maggie Barrys and all of them type of people, and they would have maintained that through, not only through the song, but the story. The story was
going
told.
with the music.
And the
Yes.
story went with the music, and you told the story. And even to this day, you would hear some songs about travellers, and you listen to the words of it, and they're actually telling you your story. And it's amazing of incidents that happened. Like we would have little ditties of songs, and personally, I wouldn't be what you would call a singer, but it belonged to me. I have some brilliant singers, and they would sing them songs, and them stories are about incidents, and some of them are quite funny, and some of them are quite nice. And even quite recently, I've come across one. I must give it to you, Tommy, a song all in cant. And I have to get it.
Maybe on the next programme we'll get you singing that.
Oh, you won't get me singing it, but I'll get it for you.
You may not be a good singer, but you're a great storyteller, and I think you've really helped us understand a little bit better Traveller's culture and why it impacted on Irish traditional music. I want to thank you and keep up the good work on the Haberé. Right, that's our first programme. I'm delighted to have Michael and Martin Collins earlier on in a little excerpt informing us better on Irish travellers and some of the issues affecting them and why they made such an impact on Irish traditional music. We're going to keep with that theme for the next programme, and we're going to look at one family in particular, probably the best known family, the Dorn family, and looking at the Dorn dynasty that goes back at least 5 generations. To help us with that, our special guest on that occasion will be Oliver O'Connell, and of course we'll be popping back to the Cobblestones for another few tunes. Thanks very much for joining us, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.